To the Arise interview. I'm Charles Eniagolu. Now, after 60 years, American civil rights activist Claudette Colvin has had the record of her arrest and an allegation of assaulting a police officer destroyed. Incredibly, Claudette, at just 15, challenged segregation laws back in 1955. It was 9 months before Rosa Parks that Claudette actually refused to give up her seat on a bus for a white person. She was arrested and put on probation, a record that has hung over her head ever since. So Ms. Colville asked for her name to be cleared and for the record to be expunged. Well, a judge did so and flew out to Texas, where Claudette now lives, to actually deliver the news and offer an apology. So how extraordinary is that, and how much of a Black history hero is Miss Claudette Colvin? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from the US by Ashton Pemberton, a civil rights activist and PhD student studying anti-Black racism in society. Ashton, great to see you again, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just tell us more about Claudette Colvin and how she came to be a victim of racial injustice.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. And Claudette Colvin, she was 15, and like you all mentioned earlier, this is 9 months before Rosa Parks actually had her situation on a bus, right? So she's in Montgomery. She's asked to give up her seat, and when she refuses, police come onto the scene, and she's actually charged with not only violating the segregation ordinance, but also assaulting a police officer, right? And she recalls yelling things like, "It's my constitutional right." Right. And so there's even, stories about how when she was off probation, she wasn't told that she was off probation. Her legal team wasn't informed. And so to see this injustice, not necessarily rectified, but addressed, even all these years later, is something beautiful to see.
Well, that's very interesting. And how much does it matter that an Alabama judge did what the judge did? I mean, to go out to speak face to face with someone who is a victim of racial injustice in a state which has an extraordinary history of racial injustice, and who apologized for what the court he now presides over did all those sort of years ago.
Absolutely. It means so much for someone to be able to, take the onus of their state's racial injustice history, right? In America, a lot of times when people are wrongly convicted, or you find out years later that, the convictions in and of themselves were flawed, a lot of times people double down on it, right? Because you don't want to think about all the harm that you cause someone by, wrongly convicting them. And so instead of doubling down on it, Calvin Williams actually went out and said, "Hey, like this is wrong, and I want to tell you face to face." And so I think that means something very, very big, because so many people don't get that opportunity for their state or whoever did them wrong in the justice system to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you were wrong," then we have to address that.
And I mean, in your own experience of sort of life in America, is that something that you hope will become a model for the state of Alabama and perhaps other states?
I do hope so. I think that the United States has to be a place that can admit its wrongs. And then, just as wrong as they were in convicting somebody or wrongly convicting someone, they have to be that much more diligent in making sure that not only do they acknowledge the wrong, but they address the wrong. They have to have systems in place to make sure that not only, hey, we're correcting what happened here. You weren't guilty of this crime, but also, how do we sort of rectify your life and make your life better? Because these wrongful convictions, have real life consequences for people, right? Whether it be emotionally, mentally, financially, so on and what have you. And so I think that America has to think more so about not only how to address these problems and acknowledge these things, but how we create systems that rectify the lives of the convictions and the people that they impacted.
And I mean, why, in your assessment, has she had to wait so long for her name to be cleared in a case dating back to 1955. I mean, she is, of course, aged 82 now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that America is, very slow in some of its progress in rectifying its wrongs, right? And so I think that with this particular situation, you have to deal with the racism in Alabama. You have to think about, the history of Alabama, like you were saying earlier. I mean, we have to think about the process and rectifying something like this. And someone having to do the research, her legal team fighting for all these years. And America is moving very, very slowly. Also, when it comes to people like Rosa Parks, you have Claudette, who was younger at the time, a darker skinned woman, not married, and so she wasn't necessarily a victim that people stood behind in the ways that they might have stood behind other victims. And because she wasn't as well known, there also might not have been enough attention and publicity for America to have to be forced to take a look at her wrongful conviction.
Yes, that's an important point to make. And I mean, I know you obviously weren't born at the time in 1955, but that must have been a very scary period for her, living in Alabama in 1955 at a time when racial terror was very real and very threatening for people who had spoken up during the civil rights movement, and she was effectively a fugitive for quite some time.
Absolutely. And I think that as we think about, the racial terror of Alabama and other states across the United States, I think that we have to acknowledge just what a big moment this is. So to feel like a fugitive, to feel like maybe even a terrorist in your own country, it's such a sad thing, and I'm glad that she's getting this moment to be rectified. And America is saying, hey, like, we treated you wrong, we treated you like an outsider. And looking back on it, what you did wasn't illegal. It was brave, it was courageous. And you're giving the next generation hope. And that's something that she actually mentioned. She mentions us wanting to progress as a society and do better. And she felt that, having this, her record Expunged was a great example for young people to know that hope is something that America can see and can realize and can immerse itself in despite its past.
Yes, and of course, as you mentioned, her case was 9 months before Rosa Parks' stand against racism, where she refused to give up her seat for a white person on a bus, and yet it was Colville who actually made that first act of defiance just as a 15-year-old. So an extraordinary young girl with such inspiring courage. But let me ask you this, now that this has happened, she's aged 82. What does her past mean for future generations of African Americans in the US? I mean, generations like yourself. I mean, the fact that she filed for this expungement and what happened to her, has now been officially acknowledged to be a wrong.
I think that, like I was saying earlier, it gives people like me and so many other young people across this nation a lot of hope. I think it tells us, hey, one, the fight is lifelong, that other people have had to suffer. And so the racism that we experience in today's generation is nothing new. It's just evolved and it's reformed itself, right? But at the same time, if you continue to fight, if you continue to speak up for yourself and speak out for yourself, like Claudette did, then there is light at the end of the tunnel. And there may be a day where America says, hey, yes, we treated you in a horrific way, but we can acknowledge that and we can hopefully do things to rectify the situation and move on. So I think that it gives a lot of young people hope, and it lets them know the fight is never over, and that's okay.
Good man. Thank you very much indeed. Ashton Pemberton, a civil rights activist and PhD student studying anti-black racism in society, and he was talking to me there from the US. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye and thank you for watching.